Let's go to Kathleen now in California. Hi, Kathleen.
Hey, Patrick.
Hey.
So I work at the voter polls myself.
Yeah.
And
that must be a trip.
I was trying to come up with an analogy or something more related to faith that I could use as an example for why you don't ask for ID. Well, for one, if you vote by mail, you're not showing ID. It comes down the rule I was taught, and that I'll stand by because I wanted every person's vote to count, regardless of who they vote for. And you seem to be implying that showing ID would stop people for voting for a particular candidate. So I'm going to let that part go aside.
Well, no, let's talk about that. Let's talk about it.
I would rather talk about a different part if you'll let me get to it. I'm so worked up about this that I'm trying to calm down so I can make my point. So somebody talked about voting being a privilege, a right. So I agree with that. But then a more direct line to what I'm trying to say is when we go to communion, we have to trust people. And it sounds like you don't fundamentally trust people. So if I go to communion, I'm not asked to show ID. I would say that getting communion is a privilege.
Yeah, it is.
Would you agree with that?
I do. But I fundamentally don't trust people for the same reasons that the TSA doesn't trust people at airports not to bring bombs on airplanes because they could harm people.
But I'm not asked to give ID when I go to communion. When I go to communion in another city or another state, another country, I'm not asked to give ID. How do you know that I'm not pretending to be Catholic?
I don't know, but this is a false analogy, Kathleen, because you're not going to harm somebody if you receive communion, and
I would be harming myself, right? Because doesn't the church teach?
Yeah, that's different. So in the case of harming yourself, that's true. You could harm yourself and you would harm yourself spiritually. But it's a false analogy because in the case of buying a gun where you have to show ID or getting on a commercial flight, you have to show an ID, and voting should be the same way, is you can cause harm to other people by doing that. That's the distinction. Going to communion doesn't fall into that category.
But pretending to vote for somebody else does, or pretending that you're a different voter does harm other people.
And that's my point. That's why you should have to show ID.
But it comes down to one signature, one vote. And they do verify the signatures, which is they verify all the signatures.
But if somebody is voting illegally, and we know it happens, that person doesn't have the right to vote.
It's rarer than you seem to imply.
Oh, it's not rarer than I think. That's a left-wing talking point, Kathleen. Don't fall for that. But my point is...
then you're a right-wing talking point.
No, I'm not. I'm somebody who believes in common sense. It's not right-wing or left-wing to say you need to show ID at the airport. It's not left-wing or right-wing to say if you're coming back into the country from a trip abroad, you have to show your passport. It's not left-wing or right-wing propaganda to say when you're going to go to the doctor's office and start as a new patient, you have to show ID. It's not right-wing or left-wing. It's common sense.
But everybody has the right to vote.
No, not everybody has the right to vote. I can't go and vote in Mexico or in England because I don't have the right to vote there. And similarly, people who are here illegally do not have the right to vote here. That's what this is all about.
I vote in my city and I vote in my county. I vote in my state. Yes, I don't get to vote in Washington.
Well, I'm very proud of you. That's good, but that's making my point. In other words, the point is that... But you
don't have to show ID to vote. You vote by mail.
You should have to show ID is my point. You should.
But you're stopping people from voting.
No, you're not. You're making sure that the people who are voting are actually American citizens who have the right to vote.
In person. If you can only vote in person, what happens to people who are disabled?
That's a separate topic.
What happens to people who serve abroad?
Yeah, that's a separate topic, and we can make reasonable accommodations for people like that. We have, until just the last few election cycles, this was never really an issue, but now it's an issue, and a lot of it ties in with the open border and people coming here by the millions now, and getting
that
lost.
Sounds like a right-wing talking point.
I don't care what it sounds like, Kathleen, and this is just common sense.
Well,
and the fact that you're, well, forgive me, but the fact that you oppose that boggles my mind. Would you be okay with no IDs for anything? And I mentioned flying on an airplane. Would you be comfortable getting on a commercial airliner where anybody on the plane just got on and you didn't know who they were?
We used to do that too. Patrick.
And then we had things like 9/11. Maybe you remember that. And we can see the harm that's caused by not having tight enough restrictions.
Rules.
Kathleen, I understand. You're wrong on this issue. I say that with respect, but I realize that you don't see it. But this is not right wing or left wing. This is just common sense. Thanks. We have to take a break. Let's do that. We'll come back to more of your phone calls, 888-914-9149.